I witnessed my husband's affair. I believe it's rare for someone to have such an experience. In most cases, people would find evidence of infidelity on their spouse's smartphone and confront them about it. However, I witnessed it firsthand. And to think, it happened in a place like that where so many people could see them. I never could have imagined it. Well, I had felt suspicious about their relationship for a while, but I never expected to witness my husband doing that in a place like that. My name is April. I'm a housewife with a 6-year-old son. The day I witnessed the affair, my husband had a day off from work, and we had planned to go out as a family. But when I woke up, my husband had already left the house. On my smartphone, I found a message from my husband. My sister has a high-degree fever of 39 degrees, so I'm going to take care of her. It seems like no one will be home today. I'll be back in the evening. I let out a heavy sigh. I had told my son that we would go to the amusement park today, and he had been looking forward to it since the previous day. My husband had recently been entrusted with a major project, and he had said that he hadn't been able to take any time off for the past 6 months. So this break was a long-awaited chance for some family time, but he went to take care of his sister instead. His sister has a fiancé, so he should leave it to them. But my husband is a mama's boy to begin with. The reason my husband was initially attracted to me was because I resembled his sister, or so he said. Because you look like my sister, and she's wonderful. I remember feeling uneasy about it. Well, when I met his sister during our pre-marriage greetings, she was indeed a beautiful and kind person, so being compared to her must have been the highest praise from my husband, but for some reason, it made me feel a little uncomfortable. Speaking of my husband, in the past, he used to frequently express his desire for children. I want a boy and a girl. However, after our son was born, the frequency of his advances significantly decreased. Now it's non-existent. We're still young, and my husband used to enjoy intimacy, so I can't help but suspect that if he's not doing it with me, he must be doing it with someone else. Is he cheating? Well, I could forgive him if it's only betraying me. It still makes me angry though. But the real issue is that even on his days off from work, he disappears early in the morning like he did today. Isn't it okay to spend some time playing with the kids on a day off? Our son is a daddy's boy, and he starts crying when he realizes his father isn't around. My husband is too indifferent towards our child. He doesn't even prepare birthday presents, and he doesn't participate in school events, no matter how much free time he has. Even on the rare occasion when he comes home early, he immediately locks himself in his room and indulges in gaming. He hardly spends any time with our son. If this continues, our son, who used to be a daddy's boy, will start seeing him as just some unknown man. Also, it turns out my husband was lying about being busy with a major project. Since he rarely came home, I once asked a former classmate who works in the same company as my husband, is he really that busy? No, not at all. Your husband is practically a desk worker, and he always looks idle. He leaves work at regular hours every day. They told me this with a laugh. I thought to myself, I knew it. Because despite being entrusted with a major project, he only earns $2,000 a month, and he doesn't even have the tired look of someone who's been working overtime. If anything, his face is glowing. This also adds to my suspicion of his infidelity. While carrying a multitude of frustrations, I finish preparing breakfast. I check the time and tilt my head in confusion. Something's not right. Normally, even if he doesn't wake me up, he's up by 7 o'clock, but that time has long passed. If we continue like this, we'll miss the daycare bus, so I hurriedly go to wake up our son. However, when I enter his room, I find that my son is still asleep. It's morning! Wake up! I try to wake him up, but instead of a response, I hear him making painful groans. Worry fills me as I reach out my hand to his pained face and place my palm on his forehead. It's burning hot. Calling out my son's name, I gently shake his shoulders. His eyes flutter open, and he says, "Mom, it hurts." For a moment, I almost panic. During this time, there was an outbreak of that disease at the daycare. So could it be that my son has it too? That thought crossed my mind. I heard that there were cases where children didn't make it, so at that moment, I genuinely thought my son might not survive. Desperately clinging to hope, I tried calling my husband, but he didn't answer the phone at all. With no time to wait for an email reply, I contacted my mother to ask for first aid advice. Since my mother is a nurse, I thought she would be the best person to consult. Under my mother's precise instructions, I quickly prepared an ice pack and measured my son's body temperature. It was over 39 degrees. I called an ambulance and made sure my son drank plenty of fluids while we waited for it to arrive. According to my mother, there was a possibility of heat stroke. Considering the risk of infection, I couldn't ride in the ambulance with my son, so I called a taxi and headed to the hospital where he would be transported. During that time, although I knew it was futile, I kept calling my husband. As expected, it was in vain. There was nothing else I could do, so I left a message on Facebook. Since he's out in the car, I hope he'll notice and come as soon as possible. We arrived at the hospital, and I prayed while waiting in the corridor outside the emergency room for my son's treatment to be completed. My father had entered the emergency room like this before, but he had passed away there. As I imagined the worst, thinking that my son might end up the same way, my mother arrived and encouraged me. "It'll be all right. It'll be all right." And then, after an hour, my son somehow made it through. But they said it would be better for him to stay in the hospital for a week, so he was taken to the hospital room. In the end, my husband didn't come back that day. The next day, I went back home to prepare my son's change of clothes and decided to bring some fruits as a get-well gift for him. As I passed by the emergency room on my way, intending to also visit the doctor who had taken care of us yesterday, the surroundings suddenly became chaotic. I wonder if someone has been brought in. Thinking that I shouldn't get in the way, I postponed my visit to the doctor. Just as I was about to go to my son's hospital room, I saw a man and a woman being carried on a stretcher. They were only covered with a thin blanket, and both of them seemed to be naked. It looked like they were still engaged in an intimate act. It must be that situation where the man can't retract his, I haven't experienced it myself, but it must be quite challenging. However, being transported in such a state must be embarrassing. As I was thinking about that, intending to pass by, my eyes met with the man's. In a normal situation, it would be an awkward encounter, but for me, it was different. I froze because the man turned out to be my husband. What are you doing here?" I exclaimed in surprise.
"Well, you see, my sister caught a cold and then,
My husband stumbled over his words. At that moment, I was also confused. My son had just been brought in yesterday, and now my husband? What are the chances? And why was my husband being transported naked? Furthermore, who was the woman with him? Various thoughts were spinning in my head. Amidst the confusion, my eyes also met with the woman who was engaged with my husband. Even in my bewildered state, I could tell this woman was my husband's affair partner. Having reached that conclusion, I glared at her with all my might, and she seemed to have a very familiar face. Why is April here in a place like this? Finally, upon hearing her voice, I remembered. Yes, that woman was my husband's sister, Eva. That split-second moment felt incredibly slow. I had been suspicious, thinking that my husband was lying about taking care of his sister and meeting another woman, but I didn't expect it to go this far. Even if he came to visit our son, he shouldn't come while still engaged with another woman. And to make matters worse, that person is his own sister? Enough with the nonsense. Since they were carried on a stretcher, I had no choice but to restrain the urge to confront them and wait for the medical staff to take care of them. They probably won't be able to escape anyway, so I'll confront them thoroughly later. With that in mind, I headed towards my original purpose, visiting my son, while carrying the discomfort deep in my chest. After organizing my thoughts, I spent some time in my son's hospital room. Suddenly, I checked my phone and found a flood of texts from my husband. As expected, they were all attempts to cover up the situation. He didn't mention anything about our son being hospitalized. Deciding to ignore them for now, I continued to wait for another hour. Then, the doctor who had taken care of my son yesterday appeared. The doctor smiled at me and said, "Your son is doing remarkably well. It seems he can be discharged earlier than expected. His fever has also subsided, and his condition seems to have completely settled. Initially, I was worried about an infectious disease, but it seems he had both a cold and heat stroke. The doctor even praised me, saying, "You gave him plenty of water, right? That was the absolutely right thing to do. You are a smart mother, and your son must be delighted." It's mostly thanks to my mother. I should get her some premium meat as a gift next time. I deeply bowed my head to the kind doctor and expressed my gratitude, but it's not hard to imagine that I'm about to face a challenging situation. Just when I was relieved about my son's condition, a turbulent storm was brewing inside me. Mom's face is scary. I scared my son. I quickly put on a smile and told him, "I'll be back soon, okay?" After leaving the hospital, with numerous missed calls from my husband, I called him. As soon as my husband answered the phone, he started making excuses, saying,
"It's not what you think. There's a reason."
His priorities are messed up again. Shouldn't you first be concerned about our son? Well, a man who is so engrossed in an affair with his own sister while ignoring our son's well-being wouldn't bother worrying about him. With a husband like this, I worry about our son's future. Since I couldn't imagine my husband's personality improving, I made up my mind to get a divorce. Life will be difficult, but I can endure it for the sake of my son. I said, "Even when our son was suffering, you were busy with that, right? You've always found time for it whenever you were free, haven't you? And to think it was with your own sister, it's truly repulsive." My husband was left speechless. Continuing further, I added, "Oh, by the way, I've already informed your parents about this, so I won't say anything at your workplace. We wouldn't want you to have trouble paying child support, would we? Well then, goodbye." Those were my parting words to my husband. 3 days later, my son's condition had completely recovered, earlier than expected. After completing the discharge procedures, we returned home together, just the two of us. Of course, my husband wasn't there. After the commotion, my husband came to apologize in person, but I handed him the signed divorce papers. My husband pleaded,
"This is the first time it's happened. Please forgive me for this one mistake. You're the only one for me."
With a cold voice, I replied to my husband, "You're still lying even now. I already know everything. Your sister confessed to everything." Yes, I anticipated that my husband wouldn't easily agree to a divorce. So, to silence my husband, I first approached his sister, the person directly involved, for negotiation. "Congratulations, sister-in-law. I heard you're getting married to your boyfriend soon. That's wonderful news." "Oh, thank you." I was actually thinking of sending a congratulatory message, and I came up with a good idea. "Would you like to know what it is?" What? Are you planning to bring up that matter?" "Yes, because I want everyone to know. If I say it, they'll immediately understand what kind of person you are." I smiled cunningly. "Please, just don't do that. If you do, it'll ruin my life." Pretending to contemplate, I continued with a smile. I guess it can't be helped. Okay, let's do this. I'll keep quiet about this incident, so could you please tell me in detail how many times you did it with my husband? If you do that, I'll stay silent. Of course, your little brother will feel betrayed, won't he? What will you do?" Without hesitation, my sister-in-law immediately replied, "I'll tell you everything, so please don't tell him." She confessed readily. When I relayed this to my husband, he was shocked and fainted from the betrayal of the sister he loved more than anyone else. After regaining consciousness, my husband signed the divorce papers and left the house dejectedly. After that, I demanded a divorce, child custody, and child support from my husband through a lawyer. Although my husband resisted the amount, I whispered in his ear, "Should I expose this to your workplace?"
"Understood. I will pay the amount you've asked for."
He left the law firm after saying those words. Afterward, for some reason, my husband, who had been caught up in this incident at work, was summoned to the company and seemed to have been squeezed dry. Then, a month later, he got fired from the company and now works at a food factory packing cakes to pay child support. Strangely enough, his affair at the factory is also known, and he always feels uncomfortable hearing young girls gossiping about it. As for my husband's sister, despite me not exposing anything, it seems that the whole incident came to light, and her engagement was broken off. Apparently, her boyfriend, who had suspected her of cheating just like me, hired a private investigator to conduct a background check. He demanded a large sum of money as compensation for breaking off the engagement, and now she works at a nightclub. Also, the other day, Eva's fiance met with me.
If anything happens, use this.
He gave me a photo taken during that moment. I thought, what kind of nerve does he have to give something like this to a woman? But I decided to keep it stored in the drawer. I'll be grateful to have it as a precaution if my husband contacts me or does something. For a fresh start, I returned to my parents' home and, with their support, I'm doing my best to raise our son. Since my parents lived far away and haven't been able to see their grandchild often, they told me to rely on them for anything. I shouldn't rely on them too much, but maybe I'll indulge myself when I feel the need to. By the way, it's been 3 years since that high fever, and my son has been in perfect health ever since. It's as if it was all a lie. He's been consistently receiving awards for his attendance. It seems like he completely forgot about his biological father and enjoys every day with a smile on his face. That brings me more joy than anything else. Oh, speaking of which, I gained a new family member. It's Brutus, the white cat who looks so content sleeping on my lap. It happened when I was saying goodbye to Brutus, who used to often visit my previous home's yard. As usual, he jumped onto my lap, but then he froze like a statue. Since I felt lonely parting with Brutus too, I ended up carrying him and bringing him to my parents' house. Now he gets along well with my parents and is just as important to me as my son. From now on, together with my parents and Brutus, I want to warmly watch over my son's growth.